Hello everyone, welcome back to Tales of the Hunger Games After 100. Welcome to the 102nd Games. As always, before I begin, I'd like to thank Christian Blanco for creating the series, and obviously Andrew Maclaine for all the wonderful art. Furthermore, I just want to say that Lord McCouch has started her channel and has started writing Panem Reborn, which is the official continuation of the series. There will be a link to her channel in the description. Please go check it out. She has written the lore episode and will be premiering one episode or uploading one episode every Sunday, I believe. Apologies if I'm incorrect, but once every week. Furthermore, I want to thank Khen Siapco and Red Dragon 0814 for just helping me edit and proofread the games. I really appreciate all the help they've put in. So yeah, shout out to these two. They have for helping me edit and just being there for me. So yeah, without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Following a tiresome and rebellious set of reapings in Districts 12, 11, and 10, Zascio Throne arrived in District 9. Zascio was clearly tired, but seemed relieved to have escaped the heat of District 10. Mayor Monty escorted Zascio for a brief tour around the district's outer fields, but this did not seem to interest him, and so Zascio was taken to the mayor's house for a brief meal before the reapings began. After several of the very rebellious youths had been wrestled into their respective enclosures, Zascio was taken to the stage amidst much wolf whistling and booing. However, when the peacekeepers present fired their guns into the air, the noise stopped and Mayor Monty was able to give her speech. Once Mayor Monty had given her speech, and the video about the games' importance was shown, Zascio was called forward to draw a name from the female reaping pool. However, before Zascio could pull out a name, multiple youths pulled out signs and posters and held them up. Cameras in Snow Square did not change focus from Zascio when the peacekeepers present allegedly wrestled several of these youths away from the crowd and towards the Shredder, which was the punishment center in District 9. Once the radical activity had ceased, Zascio finally picked a name, which she announced to be 17-year-old Dinkle Peroni. Ripples of shock and murmurs flowed through the crowd, as cameras focused on a short blonde girl with flowing long hair. Lauren immediately commented that she liked her hair. As a human crater began to form around Dinkle, a single tear flew down her cheek. But as the tear reached her nose, she suddenly pulled out a poster, which read, "The Capitol lied to us." Peacekeepers approaching Dinkle immediately sprinted towards her, while cameras switched back to Zascio, who was shaking his head in disbelief. Once Dinkle had been practically forced onto the stage, Zascio shook her hand before walking to the male reaping pool. As Zascio began to reach for a name, Dinkle suddenly ran towards Zascio before the peacekeepers could stop her. As Dinkle tackled Zascio, cameras switched to show the youths. However, many of the rebellious youths pulled out signs and posters of their own, which contained many radical messages criticizing the Capitol. Peacekeepers immediately seized these youths and led them to the Shredder. Back on the stage, Zascio had turned around and landed a hop kick into Dinkle's face, which caused her to scream and fall backwards, while bleeding profusely from the cheek. Peacekeepers then collected Dinkle while separating her from Zascio. This was not needed, as Zascio laughed and told her not to die before the games had started. Once Dinkle had been handcuffed, gagged, and held in position, Zascio drew a name from the male reaping pool, which she announced to be 15-year-old Rusk Clay. Immediately, a scream was heard from the male adult enclosure, and a strong man that was later to reveal to have been Rusk's father ran forwards towards Rusk. The nearest peacekeeper quickly shot Rusk's father in the back of the leg, which saw him collapse to the ground. As peacekeepers approached Rusk himself, he screamed at his father and tried to run towards him. However, the peacekeepers grabbed Rusk and began to drag him towards the stage. As Rusk was being dragged to the stage, many of the rebellious youths of the district ran towards the peacekeepers and a brawl occurred, with many individuals getting injured. Before any casualties occurred, Miramonte had released laughing gas into the enclosures, which subdued the youths, while Rusk, Dinkle, and Zascio were led into the town hall. In this time, Lauren and Khen commented on the muscular frame of Rusk, and the weakness Dinkle had shown during the reapings. Excuse me. Once in the private meeting rooms, Dinkle was visited by her mother, who told her not to do anything stupid in the capital, whilst shouting rebellious statements about the capital. After Dinkle's mother was done ranting, Dinkle asked where her sister was, to which Dinkle's mother said that she had seen her collapse during the brawls. A tear slowly rolled down Dinkle's eye as she told her mother that she loved her, and that she would do her best to come back. The pair embraced, and Dinkle was taken to the train. As for Rusk, he was visited by his mother, who reassured him that his father was fine. Rusk allegedly spent most of this time with his mother crying, hugging, and telling each other that they loved one another. When Rusk's time was up, his mother did not seem to want to leave, but when the peacekeepers present loaded their guns, Rusk's mother wished him luck, before leaving with the peacekeepers. Once the pair were on the train, Rusk and Dinkle were handcuffed and told to sit for the duration of the journey. During this time, the pair did not speak with each other, but instead sat silently amidst tears for the entire duration of the train ride. It is noted that the only time one of the two had made noise was when Rusk asked if he could have some water. However, this request was swiftly denied, and so thus tributes were held in silence for the remainder of the journey. After the train had arrived in Snow Station, Rusk and Dinkle were unhandcuffed and led to the awaiting limousines. No Capital fans had been allowed to meet the tributes at the station due to safety reasons. Once the limousine with blacked-out windows had driven the tributes to the accommodation center, Chief Javoisky, victor of the 88th Hunger Games, and Tritica MacDonald, victor of the 100th Hunger Games, greeted them. Chief proceeded to tell peacekeepers that they could... Oh, and apologies for the typo. Chief is actually the victor of the 87th Games. Chief proceeded to tell peacekeepers that they could leave. However, the peacekeepers stated that they were under strict orders to keep watch over the tributes. Trinica immediately appeared to panic, but Chief calmed her and led the tributes to the 9th floor, where they rested and chatted about the designs that would make good outfits for the chariot parade the following day. Tritica commented that she did not want the same stylists as last year, and to this, Chief comforted her and told her that things would look better this year. The following morning, Anthony Malmsey and Romantica Ring entered the apartment, which triggered relieved sighs from Chief, Tritica, and the peacekeepers. After a brief chat, Chief woke the still sleeping tributes, and after a brief meal together, Anthony and Romantica took the tributes' measurements and began to talk about fashion designs for the parade. After a while, Dinkle was clearly bored, and so she excused herself to use the restroom. However, camera footage showed that instead of using the restroom, Dinkle headed downstairs to the 8th floor, where she saw Fabiana of 8. When Fabiana saw Dinkle, she immediately screamed and asked the peacekeeper nearby what Dinkle was doing. This caused the peacekeeper to tackle Dinkle and practically drag her back to the District 9 apartment. While this was happening, Romantica had turned on the television, which was now broadcasting the reaping for District 4. Zasio was clearly unnerved after much alleged radical activity in District 5. However, he kept calm, and fortunately, there was less rebellious activity in District 4. After a brief tour of the docks, Mayor Flanagan invited Zasio to a luxurious meal of seafood before the reaping. Once Zasio was full, peacekeepers escorted him to the stage, where the reaping began. Mayor Flanagan's speech was the only speech this year that did not have been interrupted by rebellious activity so far. Zasio began by picking a name from the female reaping pool, which she announced to be 17-year-old Zale Herricks. A murmur was heard throughout both reaping enclosures, as the camera panned on a young woman with short blonde curls and freckles. Lauren told Khen that she liked Zale's cyan blue dress, while Khen stated that he thought Zale didn't look very muscular. Zale shook hands with her peers before walking to the stage. Once she was safely standing on the stage, without rebel activity, Zasio walked over to the male reaping pool, where he snatched a name from the very top. Zasio slowly walked over to the microphone at the center of the stage, where he unfolded the paper and announced the reap tribute to be 12-year-old Delmar Watterson. More controversial gasps were heard from within the male reaping enclosure, as cameras found a short, average-sized boy with brown hair. Lauren immediately commented that she liked the way Delmar's hair was neatly cut, while Khen stated that he thought Delmar would be a good tribute if he were older. Delmar walked to the stage, without any prompting from the peacekeepers, and shook hands with Zasio and Zale. Peacekeepers present were alleged to have been open-mouthed in shock due to the lack of rebellious behavior during this reaping. However, Mayor Flanagan quickly wished that the odds be in the population's favor, and the remainder of the population was dismissed. Once inside the town hall, Zale was met by her uncle, as he was her only living relative. Zale's uncle told her that he was proud of whatever Zale had accomplished, and slowly made Zale promise to return home, amidst light tears. Zale then told her uncle that she loved him, and that if she didn't make it home, she would at least meet Baffin again. This caused her uncle to cry loudly, and Zale was subsequently taken to the train station. As for Delmar, he was visited by his parents and younger sister. Delmar's parents told him to be proud of what he had accomplished in school, while his sister told him not to fret too much. After much love, hugs, and kisses, Delmar's father reminded him that even though he was young, he should not give up hope, and to do what he loved before the games. The meeting then ended with Delmar's mother giving him a small bag of shrimp chips, which she told him to eat on the train. Once on the train, Delmar and Zale were met by Sandy Selleck and Limerick Manx, victors of the 93rd and 88th Hunger Games respectively. Sandy and Limerick briefed their tributes about what events would occur in the upcoming week, and began by testing their knowledge of fish with cards they had created. After a while, Delmar pulled out his bag of chips, and Sandy allowed him to share them with Zale. Once Sandy and Limerick had gone to their own private carriages, Zale told Delmar about Baffin, who was her cousin. Zale told Delmar that Baffin had died in the 100th Hunger Games, after being stabbed in the neck. Delmar seemed to listen, and eventually Delmar asked if Zale would like to ally in the games. Zale immediately accepted, and told Delmar that she had wanted to say the same thing. Zale sorrowfully told Delmar that after her cousin's death, she had shown more care to younger citizens, because she felt grateful for the joy the young provided. Delmar nodded slowly, and the two shook hands, before heading to the bar and beginning to eat. After a while, Limerick returned, and told the tributes to prepare themselves for the capital crowds waiting in Snow Station. Once Zale and Delmar had both readied themselves, Sandy led the way with Limerick onto the platform of Snow Station. Immediately, Zale was well received when she posed for several photos and complimented the hairstyles of several citizens, while Delmar chatted politely with several younger citizens and saw him earn a decent view in the eyes of the capital. The tributes were then transported to the accommodation center in a limousine with blacked-out windows. Once at the accommodation center, the tributes were greeted by their stylists, Wealth and Goodness Price. Wealth immediately asked the tributes to follow him. However, Sandy held up a hand and told them to wait. Wealth seemed disappointed, but Goodness told him to let the tributes adjust themselves first. Once in the apartment, Limerick showed the tributes around the apartment, before telling them to listen to their stylists. After an hour, Limerick brought the tributes to the stylists, and the stylists began to take their measurements. When the measurements were complete, Wealth proposed a golden sailor design, which she quickly showed the tributes a picture of. Sandy seemed satisfied with the design, and so Goodness and Wealth were given permission to begin designing. Up in apartment 9, Dinkle and Rusk had tried on their new wheat farmer outfits. Tritica seemed unhappy. However, she comforted her and told the stylists that the new outfit worked and would suffice for the parade. Sheaf then thanked Anthony and Romantica, while the outfits were removed and carefully stored until the following day. Meanwhile, Delmar and Zale had been dressed in golden sailor suits, with Zale dressed in a golden sailor's dress, with sparkling fish decorating her side, while Delmar wore a traditional captain's outfit adorned with golden stars and miniature tridents. These outfits seemed to please Limerick and Sandy, and thus Wealth and Goodness kept these outfits within the closets of the accommodation center for the remainder of the day. The next night, the tribute parade was held. As the tributes were preparing for the parade, Dinkle stopped beside District 1's carriage, where she glared at Rich and Trove, both of one. After noticing her glaring, Sheaf immediately ran over and pulled her away, while Zashio laughed and told his tributes that Dinkle would be a fun tribute to kill. This caused Rubius Dalton, victor of the 86th Hunger Games, to laugh from beside the District 2 carriage, while quietly muttering to his tributes. As for Zale and Delmar, they had witnessed the commotion between Dinkle and the Ones, but they did not react, and instead listened carefully to what Sandy and Limerick said about keeping their composure during the parade. The chariot call then sounded, and the remaining tributes boarded their turns. The parade began with Rich and Trove, both of one, who waved to the audiences and occasionally tossed one of their scarlet rubies to the crowd. As the crowds fought for the rubies, the chariot for District 2 entered the parade. Romulus and Arachne, both of 2, waved and held hands, whilst keeping calm for the entirety of the parade. As the electric light-decorated chariot for District 3 entered the parade, many capital citizens were clearly bewildered by the extravagant lights. When Zale and Delmar's carriage turned the corner down to the main road of the parade, many capital viewers cheered, whilst both Zale and Delmar waved, despite looking rather nervous. Following Delmar and Zale were the rather uninteresting chariots of Alterno and Kariwa, both of 5, who were dressed in regular silver clothing, with a turbine icon on their chests. Columbus and Cambridge, both of 6, were dressed in motorcyclist helmets, which partially covered their faces. However, their bodies were covered in a thick black material, which featured tire marks. Most shockingly, however, was the fact that their outfits were spewing fire from the shoulders. Noise levels in the capital reached a deafening level as the fiery outfits changed from orange to blue. Wait, what? Wolf was the only one to regain his composure in the commentator box, but he only said one word: wow. As the fire switched from orange and blue to green and purple, the tributes' helmets suddenly popped off, which saw Columbus and Cambridge both smiling nervously. As cheers in the Capitol reached an all-time high, many citizens did not seem to notice Dinkle, who was busy swearing and pointing middle fingers at Capitol citizens, or Domino, of 10, who had vomited all over Clarabelle, of 10. That night, it was revealed that the chair from District 6 had been unanimously voted as best dressed, which did not come as a surprise to many Capitol citizens. Lauren voiced her thoughts, that she thought the outfits looked familiar, and that she thought she had seen something to that outfit in a book called 74. However, this book was later revealed to have documented the horror stories of the Second Rebellion, and Lauren's thoughts were never officially confirmed, as all copies of this book have been burned. It is highly speculated, to this day, that Lauren was thinking about Katniss and Peeta Mellark, victors of the 74th Hunger Games, as the tribute parade outfits were featured in 74. After a brief breakfast supplied by the Capitol, the tributes were taken to the training center the following day. Khen warmly greeted the tributes, before telling them that he would not tolerate any rebellious behavior. Training then began and the tributes dispersed. Zale immediately led Delmar to the trident station, where she showed him how to use a trident. After watching for some time, Delmar began to train alongside Zale, and the pair soon improved their aim. However, when Zale missed a dummy by a foot, Romulus, of 2, laughed and threw a spear from where he was standing, which impaled the dummy in the head. This seemed to intimidate Zale, whilst Delmar led her to the aquatic station. As for Rusk, he had approached the camouflage station, where he painted his body various colors. At first, Rusk decorated himself green, which caused him to blend in with the forest background. But after a while of alleged sleeping, Rusk cleaned himself and painted himself to look like a wolf. Once Rusk was done painting himself, he crawled up on Holly, a 7, and howled, which caused her to scream in fright, whilst peacekeepers present separated the two and forced Rusk to clean himself. Dinkle, however, had headed to the survival station, where she played with the various models of plants present for a while. Dinkle then moved to the wheat station, where she practiced using a scythe to slash through the artificial wheat. Although Dinkle's skills with wheat slicing were rather poor, she did not practice them, and instead moved immediately to the knife station, where there were no tributes present. However, as Dinkle picked up a knife, Trove of 1 challenged her to a sword fight. Dinkle politely declined. However, Khen ran over and told them that they could both benefit if they practiced sword fighting. Dinkle was then dragged to the station and easily beaten by Trove, with a final score of 20-0. After Dinkle had removed her pads, she headed towards the medical station, where Novartis and Sanofi, both of 12, had been watching this fight. Novartis quickly offered to patch up Dinkle's wounds, but Dinkle declined and watched the pair for a few minutes. Meanwhile, Delmar and Zale chatted in the aquatic station, while spearing fish. During this time, Delmar spoke with Zale about who they thought would be strong competition, and who they thought would be early outs. However, when they saw Rusk scaring Holly, Zale told Delmar that they should not underestimate anyone. Once Rusk had been cleaned in the camouflage station, he ran over to the bovine station, where he taunted Domino of 10 for puking over his district partner. Domino replied that he would squeeze the mechanical cow's udders in Rusk's face if he did not leave immediately, which caused Rusk to hastily run away and hide in the survival station for the remainder of the morning. After a brief lunch, training continued, and despite Sheaf and Tritika's efforts to get the nines working together, Dinkle and Rusk did not cooperate. Delmar and Zale had then headed to the obstacle courses, under the orders of Sandy. Delmar proceeded to complete the course in a surprisingly fast amount of time for his age, while Zale scored an average time for her age. About halfway through the remainder of training, most tributes were distracted by Turf, of 11, who was being invited into an alliance with the careers. Turf looked up to the mentoring gallery, where Easter Rollux, victor of the 83rd Hunger Games, was frantically nodding his head. Turf proceeded to accept the alliance, and the careers taught him a few tricks with weapons. As for Dinkle, she had spied Khen chatting with Rich of 1. Upon seeing Khen, Dinkle glared at his back, before grabbing a knife from the knife station and still slowly walking toward him. Once Dinkle was 3 meters away, peacekeepers present realized what was happening and began to shout a warning to Khen. However, Rich had also noticed, and he thus threw the knife he was holding into Dinkle's left leg, which saw her collapse to the ground and drop the knife. What? When Rusk witnessed this happening, he gasped in shock, but kept his composure and continued to practice in the survival station after this event had finished. As for the fours, Delmar gasped when he saw Dinkle getting hit in the leg. However, Zale told him that they should not underestimate Dinkle, as she was extraordinarily brave for daring to do what she would have done. Khen then announced that training was over, so the tributes returned to their apartments. Okay, now I know, so for some strange reason, I'm missing a few slides, so I apologize for that. In the morning, the tributes were taken to the training center, where their training scores were assessed. Rich, of 1, Trove, of 1, and Arachne, of 2, each scored high 9s, for alleged skill with weaponry. However, Romulus 10 managed to score a 10. Well, Romulus of 2, which saw him score highest this year. Delmar scored a 4, which saw him only narrowly avoid the bottom of the pack this year, with Wallen of 3 and Fabiana of 8 scoring only 3s. Zale was fortunate enough to score a 7, which was rumored to have been for high skill with a trident. This saw Zale placing in the middle of the pack, with a score equivalent to that of Columbus and Cambridge, both of 6. As for Rusk, he scored a 5, which was not shabby, but certainly not good. Rusk's demonstration details were never disclosed. Dinkle, on the other hand, scored a 2, which was allegedly due to her only stabbing a knife into a dummy's head and exiting the room. This year's training assessments were eventually capped by Sanofi, of 12, who scored a mediocre 6. The next day, the tributes were prepped and groomed for the interviews. Lauren warmly welcomed the once again full audience in Dalton Studios, and told the listeners and viewers alike that she was excited to be hosting her second year of tribute interviews already. Cheers and clapping could be heard as Lauren called Trove of 1 to the stage. Trove was dressed in a bright scarlet dress, along with a purple fascinator and bright purple lipstick over her lips. Lauren and Trove warmly joked around, and the usual questions followed, with Trove telling viewers that she was a master of stealth. After Trove was Rich, of 1, who expressed his fierce spirit. Arachne, of 2, came off as more of a camouflage master, which caused excited sounds from the audience. Following Arachne was Romulus Dalton, of 2, who expressed his thoughts that the career pack would put on a different show this year, and his pride to represent not only his district, but also his family. Following the careers were the tributes from District 3, both of which seemed nervous and did not speak much throughout their interviews. After Wallen of 3 had left the stage, Zale walked onto the stage in a bright blue dress amidst applause and wolf whistling. Zale was immediately complimented by Lauren for her outfit during the parade, to which Zale replied that she enjoyed Lauren's dress as well, which caused Lauren to thank Zale. The rest of the interview went by relatively smoothly, with Lauren asking the usual questions. Zale answered calmly and spoke about how she had appreciated the young when her cousin Baffin had died in the games 4 years prior. After Zale, Del Mar approached the stage nervously, in a suit that matched Zale's. Lauren began by kindly speaking with Del Mar about his expectations about the games, but in a very kind and soft manner. Lauren then asked Del Mar what he thought about being the youngest tribute this year, to which Del Mar replied that his district partner's cousin was just as young when he had won his district games. By the time Del Mar had left the stage, it was clear he had made a somewhat good impression in the eyes of the Capitol viewers. Following Del Mar were the tributes from 5, and after them, the tributes from 6. Both tributes from 6 revealed themselves to be more powerful than past tributes from their district, with Columbus telling the audience that he was looking forward to taking advantage of the Best Dressed title, which Lauren loudly stated he had deserved. The other interviews progressed without much interesting events, except for Holly of 7, who expressed her hatred for Rusk, although multiple mentors seemed to laugh at this statement while watching from the crowd. Once Patch of 8's rather monotonous interview had ended, Dinkle walked onto the stage. Lauren was clearly dreading this interview, and this dread was explained when Dinkle refused to sit down but instead performed a 3-finger salute and loudly told viewers that the Capitol had scammed the districts as they did not increase food supply. At this moment, Capitol TV was cut, and Dinkle was allegedly dragged off the stage by peacekeepers for this rebellious act. Once connection had returned, Rusk walked onto the stage in a fine yellow outfit adorned with wheat designs. Rusk immediately apologized to Lauren for his district partner's behavior, and told viewers that he hoped his district wouldn't be judged for what his district partner did. This seemed to shock Lauren, and the interview went by relatively easily, with Lauren clearly respecting Rusk, and when Rusk's interview ended, it was clear he had become a popular tribute in the eyes of the Capitol. After Domino of 10's rather embarrassing interview, Turf of 11 spoke about his alliance with the Careers, which seemed to interest viewers. After the tributes from 12 were interviewed, Game Maker Blanco walked onto the stage amidst another standing ovation. Game Maker Blanco spoke about how proud he was to be head game maker for a second year, and when Lauren asked about the arena, Game Maker Blanco simply stated that it was a beauty. This caused amusing sounds from the audience, while Lauren thanked the Capitol for attending the interviews. The following day, the tributes were awoken, and after a light breakfast, they were taken to the holding rooms under the arena. There, they were dressed in a t-shirt and jacket matching their respective district colors, along with a farming hat, which could be used to lightly shield against any weather. In the holding rooms, Tritica visited Dinkle, who was scarred after the previous night's events. Tritica simply told Dinkle not to do any stupid, and the pair embraced before Dinkle entered her tube. As for Rusk, Sheaf visited him, and the pair immediately held each other and shook hands. Sheaf proceeded to tell Rusk that he could win if he gave it his all, and that he was proud of what Rusk had managed to accomplish in the past week. Rusk thanked Sheaf and entered his tube. At this time, Del Mar had entered his tube as well, after Limerick had embraced him and told him that age was just a number. As for Zale, she had been told by Sandy to work well with Del Mar, but did not risk her life for him. The pair then shook hands, and Zale entered her tube. Once the tribute podiums rose into the arena, many Capitol viewers in Snow Square gasped at the beauty of the arena. The arena was set in a forest, with the cornucopia clearing in the center. Within this forest, there were many bushes, while the ground was covered in red dirt, small mushrooms, and leaves. Surrounding the cornucopia was a circle of bushes, which allowed tributes to hide within. Further away from the cornucopia, there lay a variety of different types of trees, each of approximately the same height. These trees were rather thin, but not impossible to climb. Deeper into the forest, there lay some springs, as well as large boulders. Near the perimeter of the arena, multiple animals could be found roaming. These animals included stags, rhinoceroses, and lions. Back in the cornucopia, many tributes were breathing in the fresh air of the forest, or looking at the light that was slowly leaking through the treetops. Most did not appear to notice the cornucopia clearing, which contained various weapons scattered around its mouth, while closer to the tributes there lay a variety of different colored apples. At the center of the cornucopia, 3 pairs of night vision goggles lay, which meant that tributes aiming for these goggles would have to grab them. What? As for water, 10 water bottles were neatly placed in the center of the cornucopia, each of which contained a special filter, which was designed to only work twice. Tinkle, of 9, was placed on a podium that faced the mouth of the cornucopia. Tinkle focused her attention on the sunlight that had landed in her face, and did not appear to notice the countdown or the other tributes. Rusk, of 9, was placed 4 podiums to the left of Tinkle, where he nervously looked at the other tributes, while occasionally looking towards the supplies. As for Delmar, of 4, he was placed on a podium further to the left of the cornucopia mouth, in between Shane, of 7, and Romulus, of 2. Romulus grinned at Delmar as the countdown began. However, Delmar ignored him and focused on Zale, of 4, who was positioned 3 podiums to his right. When her podium had first risen, Zale had appeared shocked by the sunlight and the beauty of the forest. However, upon noticing Romulus glaring at Delmar, she nodded her head towards the outer forest, while pointing towards the cornucopia and herself. The gong then sounded, and most tributes ran inwards. Upon hearing the gong, Dinkle had immediately come to her senses, and run inwards. Dinkle grabbed a golden apple, before running away with just this apple. As Dinkle was running away, she tripped over the body of Fabiana, of 8, after she had just been speared in the heart by Arachne, of 2. Dinkle immediately panicked, and as Arachne charged towards her, Dinkle threw the apple into Arachne's face, which caused her to shriek, and in this time, Dinkle ran away from the bloodbath. Rusk had immediately ran forwards when the gong sounded, and with surprising speed, grabbed a knife from the cornucopia, while the couriers were still picking up supplies. Rusk then turned around and was slapped in the head by Holly, of 7. As Rusk shouted, Holly tried to grab the knife from Rusk's hand. However, Rusk thrust it forward and stabbed Holly in the stomach. Holly screamed and tried to push Rusk away. However, Rusk punched Holly in the nose before removing his knife. As Rusk looked around, he seemed shocked to see that the couriers had ignored him. However, he noticed Zale running away with a handful of apples, and thus decided to run away from the bloodbath. During this time, Delmar had run towards a green apple. However, Romulus had sprinted in towards him and punched him in the face, which caused Delmar to scream and fall. However, to the surprise of many viewers, Romulus did not further harm Delmar, but instead ran towards the weapons in the cornucopia. As Delmar realized this, he slowly got up and grabbed the apple, while running away with Zale, who had approached and helped him up. When the gong had sounded, Zale had grabbed several apples, before noticing Delmar getting punched. Zale shouted Delmar's name and ran towards him. Once Zale had helped Delmar, the pair ran away with the apples. After running for some time, Dingle had turned around to see the bloodshed occurring. She seemed disgusted, and chose to stop and rest for a bit. However, the screams of the dying tributes seemed to unhinge her, and thus she ran deeper into the forest after some time. Meanwhile, Rusk had sprinted to a large tree, and began to climb this tree with surprising agility. After a while, it became clear that Rusk would not be able to climb this tree, and thus he dropped and rested underneath it. As for Delmar and Zale, the pair had escaped the bloodbath, before hiding in the bushes surrounding the cornucopia. Both seemed shocked when they saw Romulus brutally slaughtering Wallen of 3 with a sword, while Zale gasped when Rich stabbed Kariwa of 5 in the heart with a knife. After the bloodshed had stopped, Zale came to her senses when Delmar spat out a tooth, and thus Zale told Delmar that they would need to run, in case the careers came their way. Delmar agreed, and the duo ran outwards, unknowingly towards a spring. As Dinkle ran to a small cluster of rocks, 4 cannons sounded, which made Dinkle jump. However, she kept calm and spent her time hiding within this cluster of rocks, which seemed to bore Capital viewers. After an hour of hiding, Dinkle appeared to see Columbus and Cambridge approaching the cluster of rocks where Dinkle was hiding. Columbus suggested that the pair rest for a bit, to which Cambridge agreed. The pair then walked over to where Dinkle was hiding, and sat down on the rocks that concealed her. Cameras then showed Dinkle, who was sweating with fear as the pair sat down. For the entirety of the 10 minutes, Columbus and Cambridge were sat on the rocks. Dinkle did not move a muscle, and when Cambridge and Columbus had finally left the rocks, Dinkle remained still for an additional 2 minutes, while viewers in Snow Square breathed out in relief. Once Dinkle had realized the 6s had left, she climbed onto the rocks and sat there, whilst breathing in relief. Rusk had stayed under the large tree for most of the day. However, when he heard a noise, he suddenly grabbed his knife and began to travel further into the forest. Lauren quickly conducted an aerial survey scan of the arena, which revealed Novartis and Sanofi, both of 12, had caused the sound. Fortunately for Rusk, neither group had spotted each other. Once Rusk was near the perimeter, he was clearly out of breath. However, he looked on in shock as a white stag approached him. The stag did not seem to pay much attention to Rusk, who was slowly edging towards it. Once the stag was within Rusk's arm reach, Rusk reached out to pet the stag. Upon feeling Rusk's hands, the stag immediately let out a high-pitched noise before charging towards Rusk. Rusk screamed and tried to run. However, the stag picked Rusk up with its horns before flinging him against a tree. Rusk fell to the ground in a pool of blood as the stag grunted and impaled Rusk again with its horns. After a few minutes, Rusk's cannon sounded, and the stag gradually moved away. During this time, Delmar and Zale had approached the spring, which caused both of them to let out sounds of delight. Delmar then told Zale that they should rest by the spring, to which Zale agreed. Zale then asked if Delmar was all right, to which Delmar replied that Romulus had punched him hard in the bloodbath. Delmar then casually asked if Zale had any apples, although Zale was holding them in her hands. Upon hearing this, Zale asked Delmar if he was all right. Delmar did not speak at first, but after a while of suspense, Delmar spat out 2 more teeth, which made Zale gasp. Zale immediately asked if there was a way to stop the bleeding from Delmar's mouth. However, Delmar told her not to worry about it, as it would not matter too much. Zale seemed to realize that there was not much she could do, and thus she told Delmar that if there was anything hurting him to tell her. Delmar agreed, and the pair rested by the lake, until Rusk's cannon sounded. Upon hearing Rusk's cannon, Delmar immediately jumped, while Zale led him to a to hide behind a few boulders, which allowed them to view the spring while being hidden. However, upon realizing that there were no tributes present, Zale slowly got up. At this point, Delmar suddenly noticed something glistening beneath the spring water. Delmar quickly called Zale, and from that angle, Zale correctly identified the object as a sword. Delmar then said that he would swim under. However, Zale correctly stated that the game makers would not have just let a sword lie in a spring, and that there must be some trap that would stop tributes from accessing the weapon. Delmar nodded, and after a while of thinking, Zale said that they should leave and come back to the sword later. The two then gathered their apples and walked away. The rest of the day progressed with relatively little action. Capital citizens were primarily entertained by how Turf of 11 was interacting with the careers. That night, the portraits of Wallen of 3, Kariwa of 5, Holly of 7, Fabiana of 8, and Rusk of 9 were shown, which left 19 tributes remaining. After a rough night of twisting and turning whilst trying to sleep on the rock, Dinkle was the first to awake. Dinkle proceeded to beg sponsors for his food. However, unsurprisingly, nothing came. Dinkle then cried and shouted obscenities at the Capitol. However, this was censored out and thus not heard. It is unknown what Dinkle did during this time, as cameras did not focus on her for most of the morning. Once Zale had awoken Delmar, the pair ate some of their apples, although Delmar had trouble chewing. Once Delmar was finished, Zale gathered the remaining apples and told Delmar that they should move around, as that way they were less likely to be caught. Delmar nodded. However, the pair suddenly became eerily silent upon hearing footsteps. Zale quickly motioned for Delmar to follow her, and the two ran away from the spring, just as the careers arrived. With Turf leading, Romulus quickly pointed out Zale and Delmar, running through the woods. The careers quickly followed, and a chase ensued. During this time, Zale and Delmar had gained a slight lead. However, the careers were much faster, and within minutes, Romulus threw a knife, which barely missed Zale. Zale and Delmar continued running, but did not seem to notice a thin net woven out of vines, just meters in front of them. Lauren gasped and pointed out that Zale and Delmar would run right over this net. The pair did just that, with Zale and Delmar both running over the net, while appearing to lose hope of shaking off the careers. However, to the surprise of many viewers in Snow Square, nothing happened, until the careers ran over the same net. As Romulus and Rich, who were leading, ran over this net, the net suddenly pulled itself together, thus locking Romulus and Rich inside it. As Romulus and Rich flailed, Trove and Arachne continued to run towards Zale and Delmar, while yelling at Turf to work on freeing the boys. However, as Zale and Delmar ran, Columbus, Cambridge, and Patch of 8 whispered at the two to follow them. Zale seemed to notice, and led Delmar around a rough patch of dirt. Columbus then quickly told them to act as if they were out of breath, before hiding in a nearby bush. As Delmar realized what was happening, he collapsed to the ground, while Zale begged the careers to have mercy. Arachne simply laughed, but as she and Trove advanced towards the fours, with their swords held in their hands, they suddenly screamed when the ground beneath them gave way. Patch, Columbus, and Cambridge suddenly revealed themselves and looked down into the pit. However, the shouts of the boys suddenly increased, as Turf had managed to slice the net with his sword. Zale and Delmar were immediately handed knives by Patch, Columbus, and Cambridge, and the careers proceeded to run toward the quintet. Unbeknownst to the careers, Chain of 7 had hidden himself in a tree, and as the careers ran underneath this tree, Chain suddenly pulled the rope, which caused branches to tumble down and impale the careers. As Turf and Rich screamed, Romulus suddenly got up and sprinted away through the bushes, with only his sword and knife in his hands. Shane then climbed down from the tree and introduced himself to the tributes from 4. Columbus, Cambridge, and Patch then introduced themselves and explained that they had spent their time working on trapping any tribute that would walk past this area. Delmar then asked why they had not killed him and Zale, to which Shane replied that if they had killed them, the careers would have been alerted to the danger, and thus would likely have outnumbered and overpowered both groups. Columbus then asked if Zale and Delmar would like to join their alliance, to which they happily agreed. At that time, Cambridge did not appear to notice Trove, who was now climbing out of the pit after jumping on Arachne's shoulders. As Cambridge spoke about how Patch had helped weave the net, Trove threw a knife, which hit Shane in the lower back. Shane screamed, while Trove ran towards the group with two swords held at the ready. Immediately, Cambridge and Columbus raised their knives in defense, while Zale and Delmar did the same. Patch then helped Shane to his feet, while slowly removing the knife and looking at the wound. Trove, however, had stopped moving, while looking at the group. Snow Square was silent at the time, when they saw Turf and Rich coming to their senses. Turf then reached for his spear, and slowly lifted the branches off him and Rich. As Turf stood up slowly, he suddenly readied his spear, before throwing it into Patch's head. Patch's cannon sounded immediately, as he fell on top of Shane, which made Shane scream. Columbus and Cambridge whirled around, as the pair saw the three careers advancing towards them. Columbus slowly told the group to stay calm, as they had a strength in numbers. However, Rich picked up a spear and aimed it at Delmar, who narrowly dodged it. Trove then laughed. However, she was interrupted by Arachne, who was shouting at Trove to help her out of the pit. Trove turned around, right as Turf and Rich ran forward, each holding a spear. Trove then spun towards the group, as Turf tackled Delmar to the ground. Delmar screamed as Cambridge was pounced upon by Rich. As Rich and Cambridge screamed and shouted, Trove ran towards Zale and Columbus. Instead of fighting back, Zale ran forwards and stabbed Turf in the head, which caused them to scream. As Trove shouted out, Columbus did the same and stabbed Rich in the head. Unfortunately for him, Trove had followed, and as Columbus helped Cambridge up, Trove ran her sword through his chest. Columbus fell back, and as Cambridge readied her knife, Arachne suddenly threw a knife into her arm. Viewers had seen that Arachne had climbed out of the pit and had thrown a knife into Cambridge's arm. Meanwhile, Zale and Delmar were both clearly shocked, and as two cannons sounded, Zale pulled up Delmar and told him to run. Zale then sprinted through the woods as two more cannons sounded. These cannons belonged to Columbus and Shane, after Columbus had been stabbed through the chest, and Shane finished off by Arachne. Meanwhile, Cambridge had run away through the opposite side of the woods, and was thus fortunate enough not to have been killed by the careers. Meanwhile, Dinkle had barely reacted when she had heard the cannons. However, she had noticed Alterno of 5 traveling through the forest, and thus she had moved inwards, where she hid near a bush beside the cornucopia. Halfway through the day, a large colony of bats was released from the perimeter. Several of these bats found Dinkle, which caused her to scream. As the bats flew at Dinkle, she waved her arms around and tried to swat the bats. This seemed to provide temporary protection from the bats. Dinkle then ran towards the cornucopia, which seemed to cause the bats to fly away. As for Zale and Delmar, they had lost their apples in the fight with the careers. However, Delmar agreed that it was better that they had procured weapons. Zale proceeded to ask Delmar if he was feeling all right, to which he stated that he was. At that moment, a large colony of bats flew towards them. Zale alerted Delmar, and the pair began to slash at the bats. Within seconds, multiple bats had fallen to the ground. Once enough of the bats had been slaughtered, the remainder of the colony flew away. As Delmar looked at his small wounds and the bats had caused, Zale asked if it was safe to eat these bats. Delmar immediately looked up at Zale and told her that he had once read a book about a pandemic, which had occurred in old America. Delmar told Zale that the pandemic had allegedly started because someone had eaten a bat. Zale appeared to realize this, and thus she agreed to not eat any of the bats. The pair then headed inwards towards the cornucopia. As for Dinkle, she had hidden herself against the cornucopia wall. which Lauren admitted was a relatively smart thing to do. Dinkle had smeared some of the dirt on her face, arms, and legs, which combined with the shade the cornucopia provided, made her hard to see. That night, the tributes were fortunate enough to not have been attacked by any mutts, while most remained where they were. At night time, the portraits of Rich of 1, Columbus of 6, Shane of 7, Patch of 8, and Turf of 11 were shown, which left 14 tributes remaining. As the sun was rising for the start of the third day, many tributes were phased by the sweet smell of gas, which had been released into the arena. This gas was designed to give tributes indigestion to breathe in. However, the gas contained a sweet smell and looked like fog. Dingle had not smelled or seen the gas, as she was situated in the cornucopia. However, she was clearly very thirsty. When she awoke, she unknowingly entered the forest, presumably in an effort to locate a drink. Unbeknownst to her, the couriers had buried all the extra water under the cornucopia, which meant that Dinkle could dig up water if she wanted to. However, like expected, she did not realize that. When Dinkle walked into the forest, she slowly began to waft the sweet smell. Within minutes, she had located the mist and thus walked straight towards it. As she was about to enter the mist, Dinkle suddenly noticed Chroma, of 3, who had collapsed in the mist. Dinkle gasped when she saw Chroma moaning on the ground. Immediately, Dinkle ran through the woods back towards the cornucopia, nearly tripping on some logs on the way. As she ran, Chroma's cannon sounded, which made Dinkle shudder. Once Dinkle had reached the cornucopia clearing, she was shocked to see Romulus, who had dug up some of the buried supplies and was now drinking from a bottle. Dinkle gasped, but unfortunately for her, Romulus heard this gasp and picked up his sword. Romulus then ran over to the bushes Dinkle was hiding in. Upon seeing Romulus running, Dinkle screamed and began to run. Romulus laughed and began to chase Dinkle. Viewers in Snow Square gasped as Dinkle ran directly into the fog, before putting her shirt over her mouth. Romulus had seen Dinkle do this, but did not chase her. Instead, Romulus watched Dinkle's outline. As Dinkle traveled deeper into the fog, Romulus swore and turned around. However, he gasped when he saw Novartis and Sanofi, both of 12, running in the distance. Romulus immediately roared and chased after them. Novartis screamed and began to run. Sanofi, however, was not as lucky, and somehow only noticed Romulus at the last second. Sanofi let out a shrill scream, which Dinkle heard, when Romulus stabbed her through the skull. Once Sanofi's cannon sounded, Dinkle had exited the fog. Dinkle immediately put her shirt down and gasped air. She continued to travel through the woods, although she was clearly feeling rather ill after spending so much time in the fog. During this time, Delmar and Zil had spent their time searching for fish in the spring that held the sword at its bottom. However, they had not spotted any fish. After hearing Chroma's cannon, Delmar told Zil that he was going to attempt to grab the sword. Zil stopped Delmar and told him that the knives they had would suffice. However, Delmar insisted, claiming that a sword would provide better protection against the couriers. Eventually, Delmar put one foot in the water, and instead of screaming, told Zil that the water was extremely cold. Zil put her hand in the water, and she too agreed. Zil then told Delmar that it would not be worth the swim in the cold water to get the sword. However, Delmar responded that his grandfather had once told him that the brave would always be rewarded. Zil seemed angry. However, she eventually told Delmar to be careful. Slowly, Delmar removed his clothing and gradually lowered himself into the lake, while Zil held the knives tightly. Zil asked if the water was cold, to which Delmar replied, very. After waiting around in the spring for a bit, Delmar dove under the water. Cameras underwater showed Delmar, who was clearly freezing. However, Delmar managed to dive to the bottom of the spring, and as his fingers grabbed onto the sword, cheers in Snow Square reached a high. Delmar then serviced, while Zale hastily reached forward and pulled Delmar onto the dirt. Lauren quickly did a camera scan, which revealed that fortunately for them, no other tributes were in their vicinity. Zale hastily wrapped Delmar's clothes around him, while Delmar grabbed the sword tightly. At that moment, the ringing of a sponsored gift was heard above them. Zale and Delmar both made sounds of delight as the gift floated into their lap. Zale then hastily unwrapped the gift, to find a large towel, which she wrapped around Delmar. Zale then pulled out 2 bottles of water and some bread in the gift, along with a note, which read, "Stay strong, S/L." Zale quickly thanked the sky, before handing Delmar a bottle of water and beginning to cut the bread. After Delmar had dried himself, he put on his clothes before drinking some of the warm water. Zale asked if Delmar was feeling warm. Delmar replied that grabbing the sword had been worth it, and as he said that, Zale gave him some bread. The pair then ate all the bread, while Zale praised Delmar for his bravery in grabbing the sword. Upon hearing Sanofi's cannon, Zale correctly guessed that a courier had killed whoever this cannon belonged to. She then told Delmar that they would need to move, and as Delmar finished the rest of the bread, the pair gathered their supplies and headed inwards. During this time, Khen commended Delmar for his chivalry and resilience in grabbing the sword, with many citizens in Snow Square lining up to sponsor him. As this was happening, Dingle had begun to feel the symptoms of breathing in the fog. Lauren explained that the fog would be deadly even if Dingle had held up her shirt. As Dingle begged for sponsors, Khen called her a rascal for insulting the capital and asking for help. Soon afterwards, Dingle vomited a pale red mixture, which disgusted viewers. Dingle then traveled through the woods until she discovered Domino and Clarabelle, both 10, resting. Dingle let out a small shocked gasp, but kept calm as she slowly backed away. Domino and Clarabelle were speaking about the careers, as well as Rusk, who was no longer alive but still clearly disliked by the pair. As Domino wrapped up the conversation, Clarabelle suddenly pointed towards Dingle, who the pair saw running through the woods. As Dingle gasped upon being seen, Domino immediately grabbed his knife and ran towards her. Clarabelle followed, and within minutes the pair had caught up to Dingle, who was begging for mercy. Dingle screamed, but as Clarabelle was about to stab her, an axe suddenly flew through the air and sliced her head off. Clarabelle's cannon sounded immediately. However, Domino screamed loudly when Petal of 11 revealed herself. Although Petal was now weaponless, Domino was still frozen with shock. As Domino slowly backed away from Petal, Tinkle grabbed the knife from Clarabelle's hand and tackled Domino to the ground. Domino screamed and shouted in a panic frenzy as he tried to stab Dingle. However, due to Domino's young age, Dingle easily overpowered him and stabbed him through the head, thus sounding his cannon. As Dingle looked up, she was surprised to see that Petal had run away, after she had retrieved her axe during the commotion and escaped the battle. Dingle then grabbed Domino's knife and water bottle, before happily downing the entire bottle and keeping Clarabelle's water bottle with her. As night fell, Zale and Delmar recovered near the spring. During this time, Zale was heard to frequently ask Delmar if he was cold. Delmar replied no each time, and as the sky turned black, Zale told Delmar to sleep. Once Delmar was asleep soundly, Zale quietly covered him in the towel, before sitting beside him and looking up at the sky. Shortly after midnight, Zale woke Delmar, and the pair watched the portraits of Chroma of 3, Domino and Clarabelle, both of 10, and Sanofi of 12, flash in the sky. This left only Trove of 1, Romulus and Arachne, both of 2, Zale and Delmar, both of 4, Alterno of 5, Cambridge of 6, Dingle of 9, Petal of 11, and Novartis of 12 remaining. Delmar then took over the night watch, as Zale slept for a bit. When Dingle saw these portraits, she slowly lay down on the ground and slept. Dingle did not seem to care how exposed she was, sleeping in the open. As the night progressed, multiple tributes were restless, and unable to sleep. Early in the morning, tributes were awoken to the loud squawking of birds in the arena. These tropical birds had been bred in a mutt lab, with beaks powerful and sharp enough to easily pierce skin. Delmar immediately woke Zale, and upon seeing the birds' sharp beaks, the pair ran inwards, towards the cornucopia. As they ran, a scream sounded, followed by a cannon. Dinkle was awoken by the loud squawking. Before she had even realized what was happening, a cannon sounded, which made her jolt up. Dinkle then saw the razor-sharp beaks of a bird flying towards her, and thus got up and ran. Meanwhile, Alterno of 5 had slept close to the perimeter, and thus was one of the first targets of the birds. A large bird with yellow plumage had flown over him and pecked him in the eye. Alterno screamed and collapsed, bleeding. Another bird then swooped down and pecked Alterno in the lower neck so hard that his spine was exposed when his cannon sounded. As Zale and Delmar ran, the birds behind them seemed to be squawking louder. Soon, Zale and Delmar approached the area where Alterno had been killed. Unfortunately for them, the birds that had killed Alterno were still in the area. Thus, Delmar yelled at Zale to run through the woods, whilst claiming that there were more birds in the area. Zale followed Delmar. However, it soon became clear that the birds were gaining on them. Delmar then yelled at Zale to follow him, before leading Zale towards the cornucopia. Once there, Zale was shocked to see Trove and Arachne, who had dug up some supplies and were consuming them. Upon seeing Delmar and Zale, the girls gasped in delight and began to run after the pair. Zale screamed and led Delmar across the cornucopia clearing. The couriers immediately began to chase them. As Arachne was running, Trove threw a knife, which narrowly missed Zale's head. Zale screamed again. However, as she ran, Delmar suddenly shouted Zale's name, which caused her to turn around. Zale saw Delmar, who was laughing as Trove and Arachne were viciously pecked by the birds. Delmar then ran up to Zale and told her to run around the cornucopia. The pair then ran around the cornucopia to the mouth, where they hastily drank some of the water and grabbed a few knives. Zale then led Delmar back into the forest, where they hid within some bushes amidst applause from Snow Square. Dinkle panicked upon hearing the birds. As Dinkle sprinted through the forest, she heard the cannons of Arachne and Trove. Once Dinkle had run for a while, she looked back and was alarmed to see the birds so close behind her. Dinkle continued to run through the forest until she reached a small spring. Dinkle immediately jumped into the water, which was not as cold as the one Delmar had swam in. The birds had responded to this by flocking over the water, waiting for Dinkle to surface. Surprisingly, Dinkle managed to hold her breath for a long time. However, when she finally gasped for air, the birds swooped down and attempted to peck her. Dinkle immediately screamed and submerged again. However, soon after she had submerged, the birds noticed Petal of 11 running by, and thus the birds flew over and attacked Petal instead. When Dinkle had resurfaced, she screamed upon seeing Petal getting savagely pecked by the birds. Dinkle immediately submerged herself for a third time, and after holding her breath for a minute, Petal's cannon sounded. Once Petal's cannon sounded, Dinkle resurfaced only for air. Afterwards, Dinkle waited for a while. When Dinkle resurfaced for a final time, she was delighted to notice that the birds hadn't returned from the perimeter. Dinkle then climbed onto the dirt and picked up Petal's axe. Khen commented that even though Dinkle had an axe, she would likely die due to hypothermia soon. To Khen's surprise, Dinkle picked up the axe and ran towards the perimeter. Khen was about to call Dinkle an idiot. However, Dinkle threw her knife at the perimeter, which made loud buzzing sounds as it bounced off. Dinkle then grabbed the knife and rubbed it against her body. Soon, the heat from the knife had managed to warm up Dinkle's clothes, with many capital citizens admitting that this was a smart strategy. Dinkle spent most of the day ironing her clothes with a knife. Meanwhile, Zale and Delmar had spent their time hiding within the bushes. After a while, the roar of a lion was heard through the forest. Zale quickly pulled Delmar down, and after a bit, a pride of lions stormed by. As Zale motioned towards the nearby lions, she whispered to Delmar that they should wait until these lions were gone. The pair then stayed very still for a full hour before the pride had finally left the area. During this time, Dinkle had suddenly stopped ironing herself, when she heard the low grunting of a rhinoceros. Dinkle immediately hid herself in a nearby bush, as the rhinoceros stomped by. Dinkle's breathing was known to have been extremely slow as the rhinoceros lumbered by. Slowly, Dinkle walked away from the rhino, while desperately trying to avoid being detected. As Dinkle edged away, the rhino suddenly turned and noticed Dinkle. Dinkle screamed and began to run. However, the rhino charged towards her with surprising speed. As Dinkle ran, Lauren informed viewers that the rhinoceros could charge faster than the average human could run. Dinkle soon appeared hopeless, as the charging rhino looked ready to ram into her. However, at the last minute, Dinkle threw herself to the ground. This caused the rhino to slam into the tree behind her. Dinkle grinned with satisfaction as she picked up her axe and slammed it into the rhino. The rhino grunted loudly in pain, but as its head was still stuck in the tree, Dinkle managed to behead the rhino after a few tense moments in Snow Square. Dinkle grinned and removed the horn from the rhino's head with her axe. She then stabbed her knife into the horn, which was surprisingly soft. Lauren informed viewers that the horn was made out of keratin, which also made up human nails. This caused interesting sounds in Snow Square as Dinkle brandished her newly improved knife with a sharp rhino horn at its end. Once Zeal and Delmar had been sure the lions were gone, the pair traveled back to the spring, where they had rested the previous night. Once there, they noticed Cambridge putting up more traps. Immediately, Delmar told Zeal that he was going to attempt to ally with Cambridge. However, Zeal told him to stop, and that this would be the perfect opportunity to kill Cambridge. After some time, Delmar agreed, and slowly the pair crept towards Cambridge. Once the pair were within 20 meters, Delmar suddenly screamed as his leg was hoisted upwards. Zeal immediately hid behind a nearby tree, and watched sorrowfully as she held her sword tightly in her hand. Cambridge grinned upon noticing Delmar hanging upside down by the ankle. Once Cambridge had reached Delmar, she shouted out in glee. Cambridge then laughed as Delmar begged for mercy. However, Cambridge taunted him and asked him where Zeal was. When Delmar refused to answer, Cambridge laughed and picked up the knives Delmar had dropped. When Cambridge asked again where Zeal was, Delmar replied by asking what Cambridge was going to do. Cambridge told Delmar that she was going to make a show out of his death, which made Delmar panic. However, upon noticing Zeal nodding reassuringly from behind a nearby tree, he seemed to feel better. Cambridge then told Delmar that he was just a weak little runt without a girl to protect him. This made Delmar laugh, and as he let out this laugh, Cambridge told him that she would start killing. Cambridge then grabbed Delmar's head before examining his eyes and nose. As Cambridge looked towards Delmar's mouth, he suddenly spat in her face. Cambridge shrieked and called Delmar a variety of obscenities. While Cambridge was wiping her face, Zeal suddenly ran out and sliced her sword over Cambridge's neck, which sounded her cannon instantly. Zeal then helped Delmar down from the trap. Delmar proceeded to thank Zeal and apologized for trusting Cambridge. The two were then delighted to receive more bread from sponsors, and as they ate their bread, night began to fall. When Cambridge's cannon sounded, Dinkle gasped, but kept calm. Dinkle then held her rhino horn, knife, and axe at the ready, before traveling through the woods to the edge of the cornucopia. Dinkle gasped upon seeing Romulus, who had lit a fire and was looking curiously at the night vision goggles. Dinkle was about to lie down when suddenly the arena grew pitch black. Dinkle's face turned from a visible state of shock to worry when she suddenly heard Romulus laughing and saying that he had finally found a use for the goggles. Romulus then put on a pair of night vision goggles over his eyes, grabbed his swords, and traveled through the woods, opposite the direction of where Dinkle was. Meanwhile, Zeal and Delmar were both shocked at the timing of the blackout. However, Zeal reassured Delmar before leading him into a nearby bush, where they hid. Twice, they heard Romulus's footsteps. However, fortunately for them, they were well hidden, and thus were not spotted by Romulus. Eventually, Romulus returned to the cornucopia, where he swore loudly at not finding any tributes. This noise alerted Dinkle, who gasped. Although many viewers in Snow Square were disappointed as moonlight flooded the arena again, Game Maker Blanco promised an adorable showdown the following day. That night, all tributes had trouble sleeping, most notably Novartis, who was starving. That night, the portraits of Trove, 1, Arachne, 2, Alterno of 5, Cambridge of 6, and Petal of 11 were shown, which left only Romulus of 2, Delmar and Zeal, both of 4, Tinkle of 9, and Novartis of 12 remaining. Ken guessed that either Romulus or Zeal stood a good chance at winning. However, Lauren voiced her thoughts that Delmar might surprise them. The following morning, tributes were allowed some extra sleep before any action occurred. As the sun made its way into the sky, Roars and howls were heard from deep within the forest. Several packs of werewolf mutts were released. These werewolves were explained by Lauren to be each about 7 feet tall, with muscles stronger than the strongest lumberjacks of District 7. She also went on to explain that these creatures were capable of ripping out a human heart within 2 seconds, which paired with their fast speed made them big threats to the tributes. Delmar and Zale had already awoken, and as the first howls broke the morning silence, Delmar told Zale to run quickly. The pair then sprinted through the woods as the howls and roaring grew louder. Delmar appeared to panic, but Zale reassured him. At this point, Khen and Lauren were both speculating with viewers in Snow Square about when Zale would betray Delmar. As the werewolves responded by Zale, Delmar immediately told her to run into the clearing. As for Dinkle, she had already sprinted through the woods, upon hearing the howls and roars. Once a werewolf's footsteps were heard behind Dinkle, she gasped and ran the last few meters into the cornucopia clearing, which made the werewolf stop dead in its tracks. As for Romulus, he had already been in the cornucopia clearing after sleeping there the previous night. Romulus awoke and grinned upon hearing the werewolves. As Novartis sprinted into the clearing after being chased by the werewolves, Romulus grinned and readied his sword. Delmar and Zale had also run into the clearing, while Dinkle entered from the other side. Viewers in Snow Square became very quiet as they watched the showdown unfold. Immediately, Romulus ran towards Novartis. As Novartis readied his knife, Romulus pulled a knife of his own out of his pocket and threw it at him. Novartis tried to dodge, however the knife hit him in the left shoulder, which saw Romulus easily pounce on top of him and stab him through the skull. As this was happening, Dinkle had run towards Delmar and Zale, the latter of which stopped her. As Dinkle appeared confused, Zale asked to take on Romulus together. Dinkle agreed, and as the trio ran towards Romulus, Romulus turned around and roared. As Dinkle, Zale, and Delmar ran towards him, Romulus readied his sword and slashed at Delmar. The sword dug deeply into Delmar's chest, which made both him and Zale scream. Romulus then roared happily before running towards Zale. As Zale screamed again, Dinkle slammed her axe into Romulus's back, which made him swear and collapse in a pool of blood. Zale then screamed again at Romulus, before hastily holding Delmar's hand. Surprisingly, Delmar told Zale that he was alright, and told her to fight Dinkle. Zale only realized at the last second that Dinkle was attempting to retrieve her axe, and thus flashed her sword across her chest. Dinkle screamed, while Zale apologized and tried to force her sword deeper into Dinkle's chest. As a reaction, Dinkle held up her rhino horn knife in self-defense, which made Zale's sword slip and pierce the horn in half. Dinkle then screamed and tried to tackle Zale. However, Zale stabbed her in the neck, which sounded her cannon. Zale apologized and walked over to Delmar, who was barely conscious. As tears formed in her eyes, Delmar congratulated Zale for achieving victory, before telling Zale that she was an amazing person and to live a long and happy life. Zale cried softly as she told Delmar that he had felt like family in the past few days. Delmar smiled weakly as he reached a hand up to brush away one of Zale's tears. Romulus's cannon then sounded, which made Zale jump. However, Zale cradled Delmar's head in her lap and told him that he had been very brave and to be proud. Delmar then thanked Zale for helping him during the past few days, and after a few seconds he closed his eyes. Zale's tears were now streaming steadily onto Delmar's face, and when Delmar's cannon finally sounded, Zale wiped her eyes and collapsed. It was then announced that Zale Herricks of District 4 was the victor of the 102nd Hunger Games. A hovercraft then entered the arena and airlifted Zale safely out. As she had sustained no injuries in the arena, Zale was only taken for the mandatory health checkups, but did not require any medical procedures. After a few days spent in the tribute apartments, Zale was groomed and prepared for the victor's interview. For her interview, Zale was dressed in a dark navy blue dress decorated with stars, which was well received by the capital. Lauren began the interview by congratulating Zale, before asking the usual questions, which Zale answered appropriately. Throughout the interview, Zale remained humble and calm. Zale showed respect for her opponents, most notably Delmar, whom Zale described to have been too crucial to her victory. As the end of the interview drew closer, Zale stated that she would become a teacher once she moved back to District 4, which caused amusing sounds from the audience. After Zale's interview, Game Maker Blanco walked on stage. Once the cheers had finally stopped, Game Maker Blanco spoke with Lauren about the games, before announcing his plans for the next year. He spoke about how he had been reading about arenas of the past, and had been inspired to create a unique arena for the next year, which triggered curious sounds throughout the audience. The interview night then ended, amidst much cheering and positive energy. After the interview, Zale spent a few weeks in the capital, where she was invited to many parties. Although she had doubts about attending, Sandy encouraged her, and gradually she seemed to forget about Del Mar. After attending many parties, Zale moved into her house in the Victor's Village of District 4, where she lived. After a few years, she married and had 3 kids. Zale also kept her word during the interviews, as she went on to work as a teacher in District 4's school. After Zale had achieved victory, rebellion in outlier districts had escalated. However, the skilled peacekeepers present suppressed this rebellion, and thus order was kept within Panem.